Good morning, everybody. It's Dr. Antonio again from Still Point Ayurveda, and I'm here in Philadelphia practicing Ayurveda for many, many, many years. And I love being in service to the community, and I'm always open to working with new people. It's always an adventure. And today we are going to discuss part two of digestion. Last week we talked about digestion as far as output, knowing how the byproduct of healthy digestion produces certain characteristics known as the Jirna Hara Lakshanas. And this week we're going to talk about the actual process of transformation or metabolism, digestion itself. We're kind of working backwards from output to the actual process of transformation to input. And then when I recap at the end of this series of recordings, I will recap it in order, but I'll indicate it now, which would be the intake of certain substances or the input that affects digestion. Digestion itself is the part of transformation of what's taken in, and then the output of what's been taken in and how that looks based on our health or lack thereof. And so in Ayurveda, as far as transformation or metabolic functioning, we look at a concept in classical Ayurveda known as Agni, which is power of digestion. Specifically, Jata Agni is the aspect of digestion that's located in the stomach that's responsible for breaking down food so that it is allowed to continue on its path in the digestive tract for microcellular transformation. So we go from macrocellular being bigger, larger substances that we take into the mouth to make it into smaller components that the mouth breaks down, because essentially that's what the mouth is doing. It's meant to take in whatever you're putting in and break it down to smaller components between the combinations of the saliva there and the masticatory function of the jaw and the mouth and just the combination of teeth, and making it into a smaller piece or pieces so that the body doesn't have to work as hard to break down and extract the necessary cellular nutrition, which is a very lengthy process. You don't just eat something big and then all of a sudden it's in your stomach and then all of a sudden it's out. It's very complex. So many different systems are responsible for helping this process along, which is worth the process and the wait, because at the end result you do get what's called the Jnana Lakshanas, which is that sense of lightness and contentment and enthusiasm and health and vitality and energy and inspiration and a sense of normal hunger and thirst. And so understanding that the body is a byproduct of what we put into it, and then we can see what we put into it based on what comes out of it or what doesn't come out of it or what it looks like when it comes out. So coming back to Agni we determine in Ayurveda based on several categories. There are four major categories that we use as Ayurvedic professionals to determine what is happening with Agni, because that's going to tell us as detectives of health and well-being what's happening and possibly where. And we ask lots of questions about digestion because it's very big in Ayurveda. We also talk about pooping, but that's a different topic, and we've talked about that before actually. So the first category of proper Agni is called Samagni, and these are the Samagni Lakshanas, which indicate a sense of proper skin tone and complexion, strength, complete state of health, that overall a person's generally healthy. That's the absence of disease. Yeah, so when there's the absence of disease, that means the person is generally healthy, and that digestion is playing a huge role in this process. Proper enthusiasm, proper growth and nourishment of the tissues, immunity. Immunity is a byproduct of proper digestion. And overall, when we have proper digestion and we have good healthy tissues, which indicate also a state of good healthy immunity, this implication in Ayurveda is about long, full life. And so it's interesting is when I first started having these talks with you guys and talking about COVID and how people want to jump into immunity right away. They start taking all these supplements today to think that's going to boost their immunity. There's a natural process that cannot be bypassed because the body is designed the way it is. It doesn't care what the mind wants, where if the mind says, I need to get immunity today, I'm going to take all these amazing supplements and antioxidants and things like that to boost my immune system, and immune formulas and immune pills and immune smoothies. The mind does its thing. It goes into its frenetic sort of energy. And the body's like, well, I'm still going to do what I need to do with it. And depending on how much it's stressed or not stressed, it's going to determine how it processes that information, because everything has to go through a process of transformation. This information coming in, which we'll talk about more specifically next week in general, is very important, because that's going to be indicating what it does in the process of transformation and what transformation process is going to look like with these things. And so immunity doesn't happen overnight, and so the Samagni Lakshanas imply that when there is Sama Agni, which means a sense of homeostasis or balanced metabolism within that individual's constitution, because this is very huge in Ayurveda, then that person will most likely have good ojas, or what's similar in Western medicine, immunity. And it takes time to cultivate it. And it takes, attention and awareness and a certain level of discipline, which we'll also talk about in other modules moving forward. So then the next category, which goes more into like the pathological states, because when the aspect of Agni is compromised, and these are the subcategories of 3, so I mentioned 4 major categories of digestion. Really, it's like Samagni is primarily what's important, because that's where we are when we're establishing proper health. But the subcategories of when this Agni is vitiated in any way, shape, or form, we have what's called either Vishama Agni, Tikshna Agni, or Mandagni. And so what that translates to is vitiation, Vishama, vitiation of the digestive system. Tikshna is a sharpness, where there's like a fire and it's very high. And Mandagni, which is really low and dull. So what I like to use as an analogy when I'm working with my patients, when we're discussing Agni and breaking down its physiological principles, I say, okay, imagine you have a stove, and on the stove you have a burner, and the burner is on a medium heat, which is a good place to cook foods. Generally, it's not ideal to cook very high or very low, because, well, we'll talk about that after. So, medium heat, and then you have a fan blowing on this medium heat. So now you have this wavering flame while you're trying to cook something. In Ayurveda, it's called paka. So you're digesting, you're processing, you're trying to extrapolate, and there's a fan blowing. How successful will that meal be that you're cooking with the flame that's being blown around by a fan? So that is the general sense of Vishama Agni, which correlates to Vata vitiation, or a person that has more Vata tendencies or struggling with Vata symptomatology in your system. So Vishama Agni presents with a sense of abnormal state of tissues, because it's not properly breaking things down, and so the body's not properly metabolizing. It's improper digestion, it's irregular digestion, sometimes it's up, sometimes it's down, sometimes there's colic, sometimes there's gas, sometimes there's bloating, sometimes there's distension, sometimes there's diarrhea, sometimes there's heaviness, sometimes it's just really fast, sometimes it's really slow. And so this erratic, inconsistent pattern is going to create problems later on down the line, because everything goes in, has to go down the esophagus and all the way down to the digestive tract, go through the stomach, the duodenum, small intestine, large intestine, into the rectal cavity, and eventually out the sphincter. The anal sphincter is the opposite end of the mouth, so what goes in comes out. So when it's vitiated, these are the general tendencies and what we look for to see if there's this vitiation in digestion. With Tikshna Agni, which is sharp Agni, imagine that flame, instead of being a medium flame, you have it turned up all the way, and it's steadily up, and very high heat. And so anything you put on it will get cooked, but so much so that it will get charred, it will get broken down, it will be very smoky, it will cause a lot of breaking down the food very fast. That by the time your digestion really takes what it needs, it really is not taking anything, because it's broken down so fast and so high and so hot that the tissues are like, hey, I know food came in, but where did it go? Because it kind of disappeared. It's broken down and doesn't have enough weight to carry through the system in several hours in order for it to be processed and micromanaged. on a cellular level. So this Tikshna Agni causes a sense of depletion or insufficient nutrition, and the digestion is too much, and it takes a lot of food, and this quantity of food, this excess food, gets digested really fast, and so the person might have a tendency of being always hungry. About the vitiation or Vishama Agni can also have that because there's this inconsistent digestion of nutrients going to the cells. And so on that level, with that level of dysfunction, then that's going to indicate that the person's going to have sometimes hunger because they're not eating the right things. And it's not being broken down properly. So it's going to always leave a sense of void or wanting. Similarly, Tikshna Agni, people with Tikshna Agni, will always have hunger, will always be very hungry, will always have that sense of like, I have to eat, and can eat large volumes of food, and then still like very shortly after feel hungry and thirsty, usually. Mandagni, which is that slow, sluggish metabolism, imagine now a really low flame, and you have just a big pot brewing. It's going to take a very long time to cook. So that slow process is going to eventually cook, but it's going to have more heaviness to it. So people with Manda Agni would have incomplete digestion, heaviness, bloating, slowness, and they don't tolerate inconsistent meals. They have to have consistency. And sometimes in excess, vomiting occurs, which is really interesting to see a person that eats too much and happens to have excess weight, and they still eat a lot, and then shortly thereafter, a few hours after, they're throwing up within like an hour or so. That's just overconsumption, and it's slow metabolism. The body can't process it, so it's a way to get rid of that, because the body views that as offensive, is that it releases it very rapidly, as much as possible from the body to create that sense of lightness. So these four states of Agni are the general categories that we use to assess in determining what the person's health is going to look like. And in Ayurveda, it doesn't matter what condition you have or what disease you come in with, because we're always looking at Agni as one of the primary assessment tools to determine what's this person about, what's their state of health look like. And we ask lots of questions to get a full comprehensive history and present history to see what factors are in place and out of place in order to redirect, circumvent, and reinvent, basically. And in that reinvention, we're realigning with proper eating practices and metabolic practices, and going from there little by little. So these are the general considerations of like what the digestive process looks like in and of itself. And so these are the things that you could play around with within your own day-to-day life, noticing what symptoms are you having, or their absence of symptoms. Did you not even think about the connection that what you eat and what you're feeling an hour later, 2 hours later, 4 hours later, 6 hours later will be influencing you in that way. So think about it. What do you eat? What do you feel like during the time you're eating, right after you're eating, or anything, really anything you're putting into your mouth for information? What does that look like for you? And in Ayurveda, we also look at lickables, drinkables, eatables, or edibles, to consider as like components of what comes into the body. So think about that, digest it a little bit, chew on it a little bit, and if you have any questions, if you'd like to work with me, I have a COVID special going on for people that I haven't worked with before. Feel free to reach out to me. I'm always open to working with new people, and these are really amazing practices that Ayurveda has to offer. And during these times, especially during this pandemic, Ayurveda has an invaluable amount of information and capacity to help people to really regain a sense of health and well-being and maintain a sense of health and well-being, regardless of pandemic or not. We just kind of increase it a couple notches as Ayurvedic professionals for ourselves and for others, and we become the living testament because when we are feeling happier and healthier and more enthusiastic and inspired and energized and motivated day to day, even through the worldly experiences, even through the emotions that come and go, because that's just state of the mind, we can maintain a sense of stability, centrality, concreteness, a certain level of balance, homeostasis, and contentment, even within moments of discontentment. It's holding the space for that. And it's all about how we're digesting the information, how we're holding space for this information, how we're present with it, what we're doing about it, and so on and so forth. So I look forward to hearing from you, and I hope you all had an amazing weekend. And I will include the link to my website. And I also offer a Ayurvedic yoga class twice a week on Tuesdays and Fridays from 8 to 9, and everyone's really feeling amazing from it. So I'm going to keep offering it because that inspires me to keep offering it, because I love helping people and I love when people are really happy with what I offer. So until then, I'm going to sign off for now, and you all have an amazing day. Happy Monday. Be well.